I'm going to call our first board meeting of 2023 to order. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Christie.
Here.
Supervisor Grijalva.
Here.
Supervisor Hines.
Present.
Supervisor Scott.
Here.
Chair Bronson.
Here.
Let the record show Supervisor Hines is participating remotely. All board members are present.
Okay, please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance to be offered today by Supervisor Grijalva.
Yeah. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Yo le doy mi altar a la bandera de los Estados Unidos de América, a la república que representa una nación bajo Dios, indivisible, con libertad y justicia para todos.
We will now move to the land acknowledgement statement. There's a video provided by IT, and it's going to be offered today by Dr. Carlos Gonzalez, Assistant Dean of Curricular Affairs, College of Medicine, University of Arizona.
Good day. My name is Carlos Gonzalez. I'm a professor of family medicine at the College of Medicine here in Tucson. I'm also the assistant dean for curricular affairs. And I am in charge of the rural health program and the volunteer student program called the CUP, Commitment to Underserved Peoples. You caught me at the right time. I'm about to retire from those positions come January 1st. I have new projects in process, but I'm waiting for them to come to fruition. My back, so that you know, is I'm from the south side of Tucson. I grew up down in Ajo and 12th. My mother is Mexican, from one of the pioneer families here in Tucson. Her family has been here since 1840. My dad is Yaqui. His family left the Rio Yaqui to seek refuge here in Tucson from the genocide wars. His ancestor, my ancestor, came here in 1880 as an orphan with no family. So, in honor of my ancestors, it gives me great pleasure to perform the land acknowledgement for the county. Let me read it. On behalf of Pima County residents, we honor the tribal nations who have served as caretakers of the land from time immemorial and respectfully acknowledge the ancestral homelands of the Tohono O'odham Nation and the multi-millennial presence of the Pasco Yaqui tribe within Pima County. Consistent with Pima County commitment to diversity and inclusion, we strive for building equal partner relationships with Arizona's tribal nations. I would like to end this with just a simple prayer that I ask the 7 sacred directions to direct the Pima County Board of Supervisors and leaders to make the correct decisions on our behalf. The 7 sacred directions each have an energy, and it's important that we acknowledge that. And also, I ask us to remember that we are all part of this creation. I ask us to remember our relatives that exist in this creation, those that fly, those that swim, those that crawl, those that run on 4 legs, and of course ourselves that walk in 2 legs. Also, the plants, the rocks, we all part of the same creation. We all part of this world. So let us honor all of our relations and remember them at all times. Thank you. Ewi.
Thank you. We have several changes to the agenda before we move to pause for pause that I want to note. On page 3, item 8, executive session. This item is going to be heard at a time certain of 9:45 a.m. That's page 3, item 8. On page 4, item 15, County Administrator, Protection of Water Resources, Resolution 2023-1. Staff is requesting this item be continued to the Board of Supervisors meeting of February 7th, 2023. There are no objections. The agenda is so amended. Now we move on for pause for pause. I believe we have a video.
Hi everyone, my name's Kaylee. I'm the Public Information Officer here at PAC, and I'm here to introduce you to Bridget today. Bridget actually came to us just yesterday as a stray, and the unfortunate thing is that Bridget doesn't have a microchip or any identification on her, so she doesn't have a collar and tag or anything like that for us to find her owners. So we're really hoping that her owners come and pick her up, and she's a really great reminder. This is a really nice little dog. She's really cute. She's really sweet. She has an owner out there. We all love our animals. Please be sure to make sure that they're microchipped and identifiable in the case that they are lost, so that they can make their way home. Bridget's a really sweet little gal. She'd love to meet you today. We also have several hundred other dogs that are available for adoption and foster, and we have lots of awesome, sweet, really lovely cats as well too. So come on down if you're ready to meet a new friend, or even just to see some of the awesome work that goes on here at PAC. Have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We now move on to item 5, Board of Supervisors regular agenda, Board of Supervisors procedural organization, selection of chair, vice chair.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Christie.
I'd like to nominate as Chair Sharon Bronson and as Vice Chair Rex Scott.
I'll second the motion and call the question. Roll call, please.
Supervisor Christie.
Yes?
Supervisor Grijalva.
No.
Supervisor Hines.
No.
Supervisor Scott.
No.
Chair Bronson.
Yes. Motion fails.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor Scott.
I'd like to nominate Supervisor Grijalva to serve as our chair during the coming year.
Second.
There's motion and a second. Roll call.
Supervisor Christie.
No?
Supervisor Grijalva.
Yes.
Supervisor Hines.
Yes.
Supervisor Scott.
Yes.
Chair Bronson.
Yes. Motion carries. We have yet to elect a vice chair. What's the pleasure of the board?
Chair Bronson,
Supervisor.
I'd like to move Supervisor Scott as vice chair.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Roll call.
Supervisor Christie.
Yes?
Supervisor Grijalva.
Yes.
Supervisor Hines.
Yes.
Supervisor Scott.
Yes.
Chair Bronson.
Yes. Motion carries. In the past, we haven't done acting chair. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair, I move that we not fill that position.
Yeah,
Is
I'm
there a
comfortable.
second?
I'll second.
Motion and a second.
Second.
Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. So Supervisor Grijalva at our next board meeting will officially be the new board chair.
All right, thank you. Thank you for your
All
support.
right.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
I wanted to thank you very much for your leadership of the board over the last 2 years. I made the motion last January for you to continue in this position, not only because 3 of the remaining 4 supervisors were just finishing their first years as supervisor, but also we had just a few months before the very sad and grievous accident that disabled Mr. Huckleberry, our longtime county administrator. At that time, at that board meeting, Ms. Lesher was serving as the interim county administrator, and I think it sent the best message of continuity and stability to county employees, and more importantly to the community, that we continue board leadership as we did for the coming year. And I want to thank you for providing that stability and consistency, and for leading us with both fairness and integrity.
Thank you, Supervisor. And now we are going to move to call to the public. May I remind everybody, we have set for a time certain our executive session at 9:45. At the call to the public, just as a reminder, individuals who wish to participate telephonically must contact the clerk's office by the deadline date listed on the agenda. Each speaker will need to complete a speaker card and be limited up to 3 minutes. When you are called upon to speak, step forward to the podium, state your name for the record, direct comments to the board. Speakers must adhere to the rules of civility and refrain from impertinent or slanderous remarks. As the chair, I reserve the right to have attendees to this meeting removed. Attendees are advised that the board strongly adheres to the rules of civility and decorum. Outbursts, breaches of the peace, and boisterous conduct or other unlawful interference will result in attendants being given a warning, and if not heeded, attendants will be escorted out of the meeting room. And with that, we begin call to the public. Ann Rose.
Well, I'd like to wish everyone a good, healthy new year. Having said that, I would like to say that last year I attended most of the Board of Health meetings, and I was shocked, actually, that the medical director for the Pima County Health Department never mentioned in her director's report, any COVID vaccine injury or death update for what's happening here in Pima County. The censored data out there, not just in the United States, but in the world, censors the medical doctors who dare to speak the truth about the injuries, the data that the corrupted federal agencies, such as the FDA and the CDC, not to mention the NIH, held from the American people. And what's really disconcerting is that the Pima County Health Department chose to blindly follow those corrupted federal agencies. I, as you may recall, am a registered nurse, 38 years. Look at the gray. I served in the military at the beginning of my nursing. And over these decades, and now here in Pima County, just why is the truth being held from the taxpayers of Pima County? Let's get right down to the money. There's blood money coming into Pima County from the federal government. It's a real concerning situation. So I hope that this year, the truth will come out a little bit. Let's get some transparency, some sunshine into the health department. Dr. Cullen, who was giving those updates, those director's reports, again, no injury, no death information about what's happening here in Pima County. That's what I would like to see this year. Let's see some of that. I think it's really important. And Supervisor Grijalva, congratulations on your promotion. We'll see you at the Board of Health. We'll see you here in charge. And really, from me to you, again, my gray hair tells me that I've probably been a nurse longer than you've been on the planet. Wisdom, a little bit of wisdom. I feel like the patient care that I provided, I did some management. I served in the military. I am an American citizen. I'm a taxpayer here in Pima County. I think it's really, really important that you not consider the unvaccinated murderers, for example. It's a real dangerous, slippery slope to consider people who considered the data and made a decision to not get that shot. If people have had 3 boosters.
Thank you. And Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year, Chairman.
Tara Radliff.
Good morning. I'm Tara Radliff. I'm going to relate the experience of a poll worker who requested to remain anonymous. First problem, during the poll worker training in 2022, there were issues with contradictory statements and editing errors on pages 38 and 39 of the training manual. These pages referred to the procedure of how to handle an early voter who shows up on election day. The trainer, Jesus, told the class to listen to what he said because the book had errors. The class was told no one should ever be in possession of more than 1 ballot for themselves. If early voters came in, they have to hand in their mail-in ballot to be voided and then could be issued a regular ballot. And an early voter came in without a mail-in ballot and wanted to vote, they were issued a provisional ballot. During the 2022 general election, she worked as a judge of the same party at a voting center in Pima County. Many people showed up election day without their mail-in ballot wanting to vote. They were directed to the special services desk to receive a provisional ballot. However, the judge of the opposing party at that desk kept sending people back and demanding that a regular ballot be printed for them. The JOP called the hotline, and the inspector was told that voters didn't need to turn in their mail-in ballot and have it voided or have their ballot at all to receive a regular ballot, that they would be able to catch it. This is wrong. This poll worker stated that about half of the early voters that came in told her they never received a ballot in the mail. The majority of the voters that day were early voters, and this was at only 1 voting center in Pima County. This is a problem. Another issue was with the signature pad. The poll worker told me that about 75% of the voters that signed their name on those signature pads told her it didn't look like their signature and actually asked if they could try again. How can a signature be verified if the person signing it doesn't even think it looks like their signature? With this one person's experience at just one of many voting centers, it's apparent that we have lost a lot of security moving into this new voting system. The special hotline set up to help actually assisted in election fraud by allowing voters to have 2 valid ballots in the system at the same time. How does this affect voting? Were the never received mail-in ballots counted and the ones issued on election day not counted? Who voted on the missing ballots? Or with the mail-in ballots that were not voided on election day, did that automatically void the regular ballot that was issued to that voter? These are serious questions. We need more election integrity. We need to go back to paper ballots and declare election day as a holiday. Thank you.
And ma'am, if you would like to submit your comments for the record, we'll post them. It's up to you.
It's pretty scribbled on.
Okay. Okay, all right. Robert Royce.
I actually wrote a little something for you all, which is very rare for me. My name is Robert Royce. When I had enough of Fayetteville, Arkansas as manager, director, government, and all of the waste and fraud that went with it, I founded an organization and called a press conference. I named to the organization Citizens for Financial and Environmental Responsibility, and the theme of the press conference was that replacing appointed officials with elected officials was creating a more Jeffersonian form of government. When the appointed city clerk threw out my first petition claiming it was 6 signatures short, they made a serious tactical error. They would probably have won that election, by giving me 2 more years to hammer my central theme of a more Jeffersonian form of government, they doomed city manager government in Fayetteville and forever. When it was time to replace the old government with the new one, there was a fundamental misunderstanding. I had told them to expect a more Jeffersonian form of government, and they took that to mean that they were to elect a Jeffersonian government, which they did. 5 people ran for that first mayoral election, including myself, and 23 people ran for the 8 positions on the newly created city council. When Mayor Hanna, the man who beat me in that first mayoral election, came up behind me in a line at the IGA a few years later, I looked him right in the eye and told him that he had done a better job of implementing my financial responsibility platform than I would have. He looked me right back. He looked right back at me and said, "Yes, I did." And I did it because I love Fayetteville. To me, that was success. To watch the man who beat me in an election fulfill the promises I made to the people of my city while I returned to a more normal life, I have to ask what the city would have become if I had not sponsored the change of government election and then continued to promote my financial responsibility platform as mayoral candidate. So I birthed a real democracy in Fayetteville, and after saving the city the first $100 million, I left and I moved here. And it has been frustrating to me. I mean, this is election year and we have one party, and that party's nominees are going to be automatically elected, and to me that is not democracy. I will be speaking more on the subject at tomorrow night's city council meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephanie Kirk?
Good morning. My name is Stephanie Kirk. I've missed the last 2 times because my grandma, who believes so much in this religion of big pharmacology, insisted on getting every single one of the vaccines. As soon as she did, she immediately started passing out. So just recently, she passed out, came to, had a heart attack, and we lost her. So, yep, me too. She just would not listen, even with vaccine injured. Great grandkids. Dr. David Gortler is a pharmacist, research scientist, and a former member of the FDA Senior Executive Leadership Team who served as a senior advisor to the FDA Commissioner on the matters of FDA regulation affairs, drug safety, and FDA science policy, and he has been speaking out against the continuous use of COVID injections. Highly experienced at conducting clinical trials and responsible for vaccine approval, Catherine Edwards, MD, speaks out at a 2020 deposition where she admits under oath to Aaron Siri that there is not sufficient vaccine testing being conducted that could rule out that the MMR or other scheduled mandated vaccines for the childhood schedule do not cause autism. Autism is said to mainly start around the age of 2 and continue to develop to around the age of 8, and then, of course, into adulthood sometimes. The trials would need to last for at least 4 years to make a proper assessment. However, Edwards admits under deposition that the vaccines on the childhood schedule lack a phase 4 large-based study. The longest study conducted on a childhood vaccine lasted for just the longest it lasted was 6 short months, whereas the MMR was tested for a shy 42 days with less than 1,000 kids. Edwards reluctantly stated that the studies that were involved in the licensure of the MMR did not provide the adequate number of patients that were followed for 4 years to determine that the event that would happen 4 years after the vaccination, which would be autism, possibly. And please don't speak while I'm speaking, Sharon. Edwards admits during her deposition that there is 0 long-term safety review studies that were studied long enough to capture enough data on children in the experimental control group that had or didn't have autism to make an assessment regarding the product. I have a lot more to say, but here is the woman that was under oath for the deposition with lawyer Aaron Siri, admitting.
When does the vaccine cause autism? I think the record's clear on that. How long would safety have to be tracked in the clinical trials relied upon to license the vaccines Yates received in order for them to have determined whether the vaccine caused autism?
Object to form the question. You may answer, doctor, if you have the answer.
I'm not going to answer it. I've already answered the question.
Thank you. Your time has expired.
She goes on to answer there is not a sufficient amount of testing. You guys will all have this hearing in your inbox by the end of the day, and I expect you all to listen to it, because if these vaccines aren't tested properly, none of the other ones are.
Rosemary Byrd.
Thank you for your time. I'm here to speak this morning on behalf of our most vulnerable citizens. These are the children victims of child abuse. In January 2022, I was ordered to take my child to the Reflections Family Services in the care of Terry Stowe Bedoya, who is on the list of Superior Court approved counselors. It didn't take me very long to realize there was something very wrong with this practice. The circumstances she was asking me to leave my already abused child in were in no way legitimate, and I made the choice not to leave him in that situation. By doing that, I put myself at risk of being held in contempt of court with all the sanctions that go along with it, which was terrifying. Please take a moment to look at Terry Stowe Bedoya's reviews online, and it will be very soon very clear that I am not the only family in Pima County that is being victimized and re-victimized by the court using a counselor that is not registered or licensed to practice in the state of Arizona. The Arizona Psych Board had no knowledge that she was even practicing in Pima County. So it leaves parents like me with a choice. Our judge was Wayne Yealing, and because of what happened in our hearings, this judge is well aware that this woman is not credentialed to practice in the state of Arizona. No one, not even the court system, could produce her credentials. I was told to stop asking about it, that the judge would look upon that poorly if I kept insisting to know why I was ordered to take my son to a non-legitimate counseling practice that is not licensed in the state of Arizona. These judges have a responsibility to the citizens of this county to make sure that they are not ordering families to a practice like this. These administrators of the conciliation court have a responsibility to make sure that the people on their approved list are licensed to practice in the state of Arizona. I want to know who is responsible for checking this. It took me one phone call to check it. This counselor put in her report to Wayne Yealing that she took my request of her credentials as an intimidating threat. No legitimate professional is going to be intimidated or threatened by a request for their license information. I'm asking you, please look into this. It's affecting more families than you know, and it's still happening. It's probably happening today next door.
Thank you. Keith Van Heinigen.
Good morning. We're going to try and wing it today. I had a little tell me something about somebody's email. It said it was going to change the call to the public. Well, I'm here to remind you what call to the public is. It is our redress of grievances to our local officials. It is our First Amendment right. And if anything tries, or should I say anyone tries to change call to the public, we can have the Goldwater boys and girls down here quicker than you know what. Now we're going to move on to Project Linear. I hope you divest the county of any responsibility or actions with these people. It was a criminal enterprise from the beginning. I put up my video of when I came in here and mocked Chuck Huckleberry to his face and the entire council for their actions. It was hilarious. Dr. Not Tesla, right here. But I've been mocking you too long. I'm not laughing anymore. Judge Crystal Foster. That's as hilarious as Judge Ray Carroll. I'm still not laughing. The corruption has gone on in this county for decades. I've only been here a quarter century. I may not be the smartest man in the world, but even I can see it on my worst drunken night. And I demand you all call for sealing the border between Mexico and the United States of America, period. Otherwise, you are traitors to your oath and to this country. And yes, my shirt is deadly serious. I trust Dr. Seuss more than I trust Dr. Fauci. Have a nice life.
Thank you. Drew Heaton. Drew Heaton. Okay. Then we'll move on. That was our last speaker. We now move.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor.
Could I ask Ms. Lesher or somebody she designates to follow up with Ms. Bird and get her some contacts with the Superior Court so that she can get the information that she received?
We shall, thank you. And also, Chair Bronson, just to follow up on that, and also to let us know who should we refer constituents to when they have those concerns.
We'll get back with the board. Thank you very much.
All right. We now move on to item 9, Board of Supervisors sitting as other boards, Flood Control District Board, contract with Catalina Foothills Adult Care. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair.
Supervisor Christie.
This is a confusing and troubling.
I mean, if we're going to discuss, I need a motion first.
Madam Chair, I'll move the item.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
This is a contract to provide for acquisition and agreement in the amount of $1.3 million, a little over $1.3 million. And looking at the background, it says Pima County Regional Flood Control District will acquire flood-prone land and improvements. The acquisition is a result of finger rock wash flooding that occurred in the summers of 21 and 22. The 21 flood damaged the contents of the structure of the subject property, and the 2022 flood left the subject property in an uninhabitable condition. The purpose of the acquisition will be to discontinue the use of the property from the current adult home care use and to demolish the improvements. Acquiring and removing structures that have suffered repetitive losses is a priority of the floodplain. So the county is going to buy this land with a home on it that is a 9-bedroom residential structure located on just under an acre of land, for a not-to-exceed amount of $1.3 million. And this amount includes the appraised value of $1.5 million, less some charges and closing costs. I've looked at the appraisal report from CBRE, and they are instructed by Pima County Real Property Services to make this appraisal as, and I'm quoting, as a part of this assignment, CBRE was instructed to value the subject property under the hypothetical condition that no flood damage had occurred. That no flood damage had occurred. Yet their appraisal is supposed to be based on that and not on the real facts that this property has been severely damaged. Further, it says the subject is managed by Catalina Foothills Adult Care, a local owner-operator of seniors housing communities, notice it's plural, communities in Tucson, Arizona. Currently, the subject, which we've been talking about, the subject is the only facility under their management. So if we continue on to look at the appraisal as a going concern, we're not, the county, the floodplain is not buying the property, they're buying a business. They are including in the appraisal the business of this care facility. That's not the job of floodplain. The real estate, as is under the allocation, is under the allocation of the going concern. As is a going concern. It's not a going concern. It's been ruined by flooding. But yet, they're proposing a value of $1.249 million and then a going concern market value of $1.5 million. The net operating income for this facility is $146,000, and the insurable value, the replacement cost, is $700,000. Yet we are contracting not only to buy a flood-damaged property, but to pay for the value of a business in the amount of $1.3 million. I can't find anything that explains what's going on here, and I definitely think that this is a very interesting situation.
Ms. Lesher, I concur. That's
Thank you.
There's some problems here.
Chair Bronson and Supervisor Christie, I will ask Deputy County Administrator DeBonis to talk about this item before you.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, admittedly, this is a unique circumstance under the flood-prone land acquisition program. So the purposes of the program is to move inhabitants out of harm's way from the floodplain. And you've seen many instances of the district acquiring lands that have been impacted by floodwaters.
Can you name one?
Supervisor Christie, I can't specify it, but these come to the board regularly, and we can follow up with a report. There may be, potentially a half dozen of these a year that come to the board and receive approval, so we can get a full detailed report on the flood-prone land acquisition program.
So is floodplain acquisition policy to not only pay for the land that's been damaged by flooding and is rendered virtually useless, but it's also to remunerate the current or the previous business owners the value of their business? Are we in the business of buying businesses or buying flood-prone land?
So, Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, this is the first instance that I'm aware of where there has been a business component of it. When you look at the appraisal, the value associated with the business components of it, right, and it's tangible items. It's not the business. It is the items associated with the business is nominal, right? So the amount of that, I believe, is roughly $250,000 on the business side of it. So
didn't they have insurance?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, they did, and that's noted in the BOSAR where they did receive some payment of insurance, and the purchase price has been deducted by that amount of insurance premium that they received.
And I'm sure you're aware that in January of 2003, this property, which the county is going to pay $1.3 million for, plus some change, was originally purchased by the current owners that we are paying their business enterprise in addition to the value of the property. They bought that same property that we're paying $1.3 million for $460,000.
So, Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, as you noted, an appraisal was done that looks at the current market factors and assigns or opines a value of that property, and that was done in accordance with certified appraisal standards. So that appraisal is done by...
If you're in the appraisal business, is it proper to take direction from the person authorizing the appraisal to tell the appraiser how to value the property, which is exactly what's happening here?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, so there is interaction that occurs with the appraisal as we're requesting them to perform their work. So in this instance, as the property was impacted repetitively by loss, it is our opinion that it's unsafe to be occupied and should be acquired and then removed from the floodplain. In having the appraiser perform that appraisal, there was the aspect associated with business value, which again is a nominal portion of the overall amount of the purchase, which was our intent to have the property owner who has been impacted by the floods not be further impacted by not making a complete offer to them for the acquisition of that property.
Well, I've made a number of appraisals in my business life on a number of properties, and it was very clear that during that appraisal process, I was not to influence or direct the appraiser to make any assumptions or to make any kind of characterizations of the property. And this is exactly what the county is doing with this appraiser. How could that be allowed?
So, Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, I would submit that there was no impropriety in speaking with the appraiser and providing them input and guidance from which the county set expectations for moving forward with potentially acquiring the property. So in this instance, again, the portion of it associated with business value, I believe, is $250,000 out of the overall appraisal, which is nominal.
Madam Chair, this is against anything and everything I've ever been involved with in an appraisal and the purchase of property. And
we're headed to the time certain. I'm going to call the question, but I share your concerns. I'll call the question. Quick roll call.
Supervisor Christie?
No.
Supervisor Grijalva?
Yes.
Supervisor Hines?
Yes.
Supervisor Scott?
Yes.
Chair Bronson?
No. Motion carries. We are now moving to items 7 and 8, executive session. I entertain a motion to move into exec.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. If there are no objections, we'll convene in exec and reconvene in regular session at the sound of the gavel. Good morning. We are back in regular session. We had 2 executive session items on the agenda. Item 7, what's the pleasure of the board on item 7? This Supervisor Grijalva. I'll second. Any discussion, any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 8. This is in regard to Court of Appeals, Rogers versus Huckleberry. It's, I will make the motion to not appeal the decision.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. I was going to move there next. We're going to take one item out of order on the addendum agenda, and that is Worldview Lease Purchase Agreement. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
given the history of this agreement with Worldview and the contentious controversy that it's experienced over the several last years, we just received the new purchase agreement with Worldview Friday afternoon, and I don't feel that we've given it enough time to discern it and to explore it all. There are a lot of moving parts to it, and I think because of the controversy, as I alluded to earlier, over the entire agreement with Worldview, that it would be in the community's best interest, the county's best interest, Worldview's best interest, and any other party involved's best interest, that we kind of sit back and discern this agreement a little bit more in depth, take more time to analyze it, make sure the public gets a chance to review it and to see it, and make sure as well that there are ample opportunities for questions and those questions to be addressed and answered.
So I need a motion.
As this all plays out, I don't think it's going to cause any problems to take this for one more meeting, so I would like to make the motion that we continue the discussion of the Worldview Lease Purchase Agreement as presented on the addendum item and discuss it at the next meeting in
January 24th. There's a motion. Is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair, I'll move the item for discussion purposes.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Supervisor Scott.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'd like to ask Ms. Lesher or somebody that she designates to give an overview of the item for us.
Thank you very much. And Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, what you have before you today is a new lease, a new purchase agreement that will now be in 5 years based on, and additional opportunities to renew for 5 years based on a full 90% of the appraised value. It is a reboot of what occurred in 2016 with that lease. Excuse me. We have had, and I apologize for the late receipt of materials to the board, but we have been working, I know, through the weekend with representatives of Worldview to make sure that we had the agreement before you today. I think one of the considerations of the time is that we have through the end of the week regarding the litigation. We're not going to appeal, and I think key to that is the new agreement. Mr. Ryan Hartman is here, who's the president and CEO of Worldview. Carmine DeBonis has been working with Heath Viscordi-Chiordi, and they have been working on this agreement. They have the details and can provide some of that, the granularity on this lease, Carmine, and then I'm sure that Mr. Hartman would have some additional comments.
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
could I pose some questions to Mr. DeBonis, and if he wants to ask Mr. Hartman to answer any of these, we can. I may have some questions for Mr. Hartman as well. Mr. DeBonis, what have been the total costs to the county for the construction and maintenance of the Worldview facility, as well as any other costs that we've incurred?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Scott, so the construction of the building was $13.1 million. Separate from that is the public spaceport that was $2.1 million.
And that's the total of the costs that we have incurred, that the county has incurred?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, correct.
And then what will be the total amount that Worldview will have paid to the county under the terms of both the current agreement and the one that we're considering right now?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, since inception of the 2016 agreement, that total is a little bit over $3.4 million, so $3,425,351.
And then what? Could you just outline real quickly, I know that Ms. Lesher referred to 90% of the appraised value if the property ends up being purchased, but could you also speak to the lease payments, at least for the first 4-year term? I know there are options to renew.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, so the purchase price is at 90% of appraised value, which would be $14.4 million if that option is exercised by Worldview within 24 months of execution of this lease. If they do not execute that option, then upon renewal, as you mentioned, there's 4 5-year renewal opportunities. Upon renewal of the lease purchase agreement, then a new appraisal would be done, and that would set then the market rate for a fee purchase as well as the lease rate. The lease payments over the initial 5-year period, they start at just over $86,000, and then they increase 2.5% per year. So in year 5, that monthly lease payment is $95,000, just over $95,000.
So under the terms of the new agreement, the county will will more than recoup the costs that it has incurred for construction and maintenance.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, that's correct.
One of the pieces of information that was shared with me when I posed some questions to the county administrator prior to this meeting is that, and she shared information that Mr. Viscovi-Chiordi had passed on to you, is that Worldview is delinquent on their current lease payments dating back to August. Is that the case?
So, Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, those payments have not been made. As you are aware, the appeal court ruling took effect or came out on October 26. So Worldview has not made payments for October, September, November, and December, but we have been in constant discussions with them in negotiations of a new lease, and they have agreed to pay those rent amounts moving forward.
Thank you. And this agreement refers to quarterly employment and salary reports that will come to the county, and those are noted that they will be certified reports. Who certifies those salary and employment reports that come to the county?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, those are certified by Worldview, essentially a declaration of what those counts are, both in terms of employment number and the salary amounts. That's no different than under the current agreement.
The other thing I wanted to ask Mr. DeBonis, and this would be by way of direction, is that I know that there was an economic benefit analysis done for the original Worldview proposal, but that was quite a few years ago. I would like to have, and I'm sure my colleagues would like to have, an economic benefit analysis put together by our economic development team, perhaps working with Worldview and our other regional partners, so that we can see the economic benefit not only for Worldview, but any ancillary industries or businesses that would benefit if we move forward with this.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, so noted. We'll work on that.
And then I wonder, Madam Chair, while I have the floor, if I could ask Mr. Hartman a couple of questions.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Hartman. My understanding, and you know that 3 of the 5 members of this board are just in our first term, so we've just been supervisors for a little over 2 years, so a lot of the discussion connected with Worldview is new to all of us, but my understanding is that you've been in charge of Worldview since 2019. We're looking at a different proposal than what came before previous boards. I wonder if you could talk about some of the key changes to the business plan that we're being asked to consider.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. I think we're all in the same boat here in that I wasn't around when the original lease was negotiated, so I appreciate the partnership to be able to identify something that's both beneficial to the county and the taxpayers of Pima County, but also to Worldview. So the company's been evolving since the time that this original lease was signed. At the time of signing the original lease, the company was focused solely on space tourism. The idea that we would use the facility to develop and manufacture assets to be used for taking people to the edge of space into the stratosphere to be able to experience viewing our Earth. Over time, and one of the main charters for me as CEO has been to evolve the business model to something that is far more sustainable and contributes to a growing nature for the business. And so we have really focused on a component of our business, which is known as remote sensing, where we use our technology to essentially mimic a satellite operating in the stratosphere to be able to collect data specifically for the contribution of sciences, for monitoring critical infrastructure, and for national defense applications. So this last year was one of our largest years in our remote sensing business. The year in front of us will again be our largest year and continuing to grow. I will note that one of the challenges with previous business models was the ability to raise money to fund the business moving forward. Our evolved business model, which has a component of space tourism but adds to it a very foundational element of remote sensing, is far more attractive to investors and is something that we're able to raise money on.
Could you speak, Mr. Hartman, to something that is part of the agreement, which is that we're now looking at a smaller number of jobs. Yes. I believe it's up to 125 positions, whereas the original plan, which I know you weren't part of, envisioned up to 400 jobs, but the up to 125 jobs will come at a higher salary level.
Yeah, Supervisor Scott, the original agreement of 400 employees was unrealistic. Not unrealistic from a business perspective, but unrealistic from a facilities perspective. The facility as is today can house no more than 140 people at a time. So there's not the infrastructure in the facilities to support any more than that. And so we raised this as we started going through this updated lease, that I can't agree to something that I know is impossible, that bringing 400 people into that facility will just overwhelm the facility. That said, our business plan will take us to approximately 400 people over a period of time, and the benefit of that will be that we will have to invest in additional facilities and further contribute to economic development in Pima County.
Can you Will you also work with Mr. DeBonis and our economic development team on the economic benefit analysis that I requested a few minutes ago?
Supervisor Scott, it'll be my pleasure to do so.
Excellent. And then I just had one other question. This is probably better directed at Mr. DeBonis. Mr. DeBonis, because we made a decision as a board a few minutes ago to not appeal the Court of Appeals decision to the Supreme Court, we now have a choice of either terminating the current lease and evicting Worldview Enterprises from the property, or going with this new lease agreement. Have you and Ms. Lesher and our economic development team talked about the potential ramifications of the former decision?
By former decision, you mean what?
I mean, thank you, Madam Chair. I mean by not just terminating the lease, but evicting Worldview Enterprises from the facility.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, yes, we have. We've had open discussions with Worldview. We've discussed it internally. We've vetted with legal counsel. We've not taken any of these options lightly, and we believe that the best recommendation is to move forward with approval of the new lease.
Madam Chair, I concur with that recommendation, not only because of the terms of the agreement that have been presented to us, but also because of what I consider to be the potential negative ramifications within the business community and prospective business community for Pima County. Thank you for allowing me so much time to ask those questions, and Mr. Hartman, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. So any further, Supervisor Christie?
Given the fact that we've been given less than 24 hours to review this contract, I was hoping that we could continue this, as I stated earlier, so we could analyze more of the pertinent questions. But seeing as how that did not take place, this is basically starting all over again with a brand new lease, realistically. This is not a continuation. This is a complete modification, a complete redo, a brand new lease. And I direct my questions, I guess, to Mr. DeBonis, because you have been so intimate involved in this new lease process. What's the creditworthiness of Worldview? What is their credit rating? What is their profit and loss? What's their cash flow? Has all of that been analyzed, or is this just basically a quick fix to keep them in place and hopefully they can eke out a profit or something and keep running so that we don't have a vacant business? Everything that I've seen, read, and heard over the last few years with Worldview is that they've been struggling. And I have yet to see what their financials look like, and I think it's incumbent that those be brought out, and they would have had we been able to continue this. But what is their cash flow? How much cash do they have in the bank? What are their monthly expenses? What's their credit worthiness?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, I'm going to defer some of those questions to Mr. Hartman, whom I believe can answer them in more detail. We have, as we do with all economic development prospects, looked at the worthiness of the company. We believe that they're financially solvent. We understand that they continue to make strides with attracting investors, and I would just defer to Mr. Hartman for any of the details in terms of cash flow and expenses and things of those sorts.
Supervisor.
You can see Supervisor Christie is from the private sector.
Supervisor Christie, I appreciate the questions. I will point out that we are a privately held company. Our financials are not public. I will tell you that we lose money on a yearly basis. As we grow the business, we're still what would be considered an early growth stage business, and so we rely on venture capital and other investors to get through any given year. We're in the process of finalizing the next round of investment that will bring the money into the company to get us to cash flow positive.
Here we are in a recession area, and you're looking for venture capital in this kind of a downturn that we're experiencing. That's pretty risky, wouldn't you say? If not difficult?
Supervisor Christie, it is difficult. That said, we have been successful. Our business is attractive for a lot of the reasons I just spoke of. You know, when a company is trying to raise money in an environment like we are in today, there are several different things that investors take a look at. One of them is the demand for the product. You know, is there going to be demand that will sustain the business over time? Being a business before that was primarily in the space tourism business, reliant on consumers to spend a significant amount of money to experience what is a thrill ride, that kind of business is nearly impossible to raise money for in this kind of environment. My focus has been evolving the business into a remote sensing business where we're delivering a capability to national defense and intelligence.
Sensing what?
Remote sensing.
Is that spying?
No, it's collecting data and providing that data for different types of customers. So, for example, one of the visitors at the Worldview facility today is an oil and gas customer, and the kind of capabilities we provide for them is methane detection. We have other customers in the private sector, like electric utility, high voltage power line operators, being able to monitor their power lines. But my point being, Supervisor Christie, that having a portion of our business that is focused on national security, defense, and commercial enterprise type of surveillance is a far more attractive business in this kind of economic environment. And so we are attracting investors that like that side of our business, especially considering that side of our business will get us to cash flow positive next year.
Well, that was my question. I know you're privately held, but you're not cash flow positive.
No, we are not cash flow positive. We are early growth stage business, meaning that our business is still scaling, and so
early growth business, but you've been around since 2016.
Yes, sir. I'd say that for the most part, we're far ahead of a lot of other companies of our type in getting to an early growth stage for our business.
What about this might be back to Mr. DeBonis. Forgive me for having to stand. What about forgiving all past owed amounts? Is the county forgiving any kind of debts from the back? Specifically, rental abatement, COVID support. What have we supported the payment structure, the lease payment structure, over the last couple of years to Worldview? Are we going to recoup them or forgive them, or have they been given any?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Christie, there's not been any abatements granted. So the agreement was amended in 2019 by the then seated Board of Supervisors to adjust some of those parameters, but there have been no grantings of forgiveness or abatement of any of those amounts due to the county.
So how far in arrears is Worldview at this point? And the amount?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, again, so it's the months of October, November, December. So those monthly rent payments were $80,000.
A month or total?
A month. So there's an outstanding balance of $402,000.
And how's that going to be addressed?
So again, the ruling by the appeals court occurred on October 26th, causing us to have discussions about potentially renegotiating a lease, which is before you today. Worldview has indicated, and Mr. Hartman can confirm, that those past due amounts will be paid to the county.
And you discussed the employment benchmarks, and you mentioned that was unrealistic or when it was first set up. Have you instituted with the county, or has the county required any employment benchmarks with this new lease, or is that?
So on the subject, Supervisor Christie, of the past payments, we have agreed to pay those. You know, I wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to stay in the facility.
The $80,000 a month?
Yes, sir.
How do you plan on paying that? Out of your cash reserves that are negative cash flow?
So I want to be very clear when I say that we're not cash flow positive. We're not cash flow positive from an operations perspective, meaning the customers we have, our revenues don't fully cover the expenses of the business, which is normal for an early growth stage business. On a yearly basis, we're clearly cash flow positive because we exist. And the reason that we're cash flow positive is from the investments that we take in from our investors, and that will continue moving forward. And so the answer is, out of the cash that the company receives, part of the use of cash is to pay our lease from before and moving forward.
How about your suppliers? Do you have any situational instances of not being able to pay your suppliers?
Say again?
Are you able to pay all your bills?
Yes, I mean, my point around that we are a business that relies on venture capital, and on an annual basis we are cash flow positive. We bring in enough cash to keep the company moving forward. On the employment benchmarks, there is employment benchmarks in the new lease, starting at 90 heads for the year 2023, and growing from that over the term of the lease.
Another concern that I have is the certified reports that Worldview is providing. Wouldn't it be better if we had an outside agency doing those reports? I hate to use something as blunt as the fox in the hen house, but we're relying on Worldview to certify reports of financial stability. Is that a proper way to make sure that we're getting the right information, or should it be from an outside entity?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, we've had faith in the certifications previously provided to us by Worldview. They've done that consistently. Even with a third-party consultant or contractor in place, that information would have to go to them from Worldview. So in this instance, Worldview's providing that information directly to us, and thus far we've not had instances where we've felt they've not been forthright with providing that data.
Well, I just have to make an observation that all of the indications of this lease, all of the indications with Worldview, sends a shiver up my spine. It doesn't feel secure. It doesn't feel right. It's, I think, very shaky. I might have changed my mind had I had more time. If this had been continued, I might have been more supportive. But based on what I'm hearing now and what I'm listening to, I unfortunately cannot go ahead and support this new lease. I appreciate your candor and your openness. I know it's tough when you're privately held, but as you know, cash is king, and if you don't have enough cash, you don't have enough operational ability, and that's my biggest concern. And from your business model, I'm concerned that it is generating enough cash. But having said that, Madam Chair, thank you for allowing me to ask questions.
Or is there any further discussion? Then I'll call the question. Roll call.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Supervisor Hines.
Actually, if I could ask. Thank you. So
we can't hear you very well. We can hardly hear you.
Okay.
Okay, that's better. We're at whatever you did.
For Mr. DeBonis, what does it cost the county monthly to maintain the facility we're talking about leasing?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Hines, under the agreement, Worldview is responsible for maintenance of the facility.
Zero.
Great.
Zero.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Then I'll call the question. Roll call.
Okay, this is for approval. Supervisor Christie?
No.
Supervisor Grijalva?
Yes.
Supervisor Hines?
Yes.
Supervisor Scott?
Yes.
Chair Brunson?
Yes, by your vote of 4-1, motion carries. We move back to the regular, I'm going to go real quickly on the addendum agenda. The Special Taxing District, Cotera Morano Irrigation District. I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving back to our regular agenda, Board of Supervisors sitting as the board. Approval of the consent calendar. What's the pleasure of the board?
Madam Chair,
Supervisor.
could we consider items 5 and 19 separately, please?
5, 19, okay.
Chair Bronson, item 20.
Madam Chair, it doesn't sound as bad as, it's not as bad as it sounds. And I'll explain, but 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 16, 19, 20, and 21.
Is there anything left?
Right.
Well, if, when you so designate, I can address.
Okay, 19 and 20 have already been pulled, I think, by you, right?
I did 19, Supervisor Grijalva
Did 20. All right. All right. So we've got all that. I'll move the remainder, whatever's left of consent.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 5, or wait.
1.
1, 2, 3.
Madam Chair, if I could, there's just an observation that I'd like to address on 1, 2, 3, 10, 12, 19, and 20. And then we could go back and
10,
vote on them.
19 and 20?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3, 10, 12, 19, and 20.
I'm looking at it, out of 24 items, 7 of them, almost a third, have administrative problems, retroactive problems. On number 1, as it states under retroactive, this grant amendment was approved at the August 15th Board of Supervisors meeting. There were additional delays due to budget issues. The negative impact of not approving this amendment is low-income families will not receive emergency utility. So we have this underlying, if we don't do this, we're going to have a real problem. But there were additional delays due to budget issues. Under number 2, the amount of revenue expected to be gained from this billing agreement has increased significantly since last year, and there were delays in getting the estimated amount to use. Under item 3, this agreement expired due to a clerical error. The amendment expired before it could be renewed. Under number 6, this is also another item that will go in as far as from the general fund and not part of the budgeting process. Number 10, finalization of work covered under this contract took longer than anticipated. Under 19, the negative impact, the wire transfer from the U.S. Department of Treasury was received November 23rd. The period of performance on this grant started March 26th. There are no official grant amendments for this grant. Under item 20, the notice was received November 29th of 22, and the award began December 1st of 22. These are like really in arrears, and they represent almost a third of these. Is there a problem with our grant structure, our accounting, and why so many retroactive issues, and then we have like a fire drill in order to shove them through? Is that by design, or what's?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, and I think rather than the fire drill, when we look at something and explain that there is a concern, if there's not an affirmative action on it, it's simply the inability to accept those grants in many cases, or to pay those bills. So if there's a desire to delay, and have, continue these to other items, that is fine, but we hope that we will ultimately be able to either pay the bills and or receive the funds. Each of these has a different concern or impediment that has caused them through the holidays or different times to be retroactive. We work very hard to have them not be retroactive. It's also why we call them out on the BOSER to make sure that you're all aware if that has occurred. Happy to provide you with a summary on each of these incidents why that has occurred, and I can assure you we work with staff daily to make sure that we do not have retroactive grants and contracts coming to the board.
This is almost a third of those presented to this board.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
7 out of 24. Do you have any suggestions how this might be?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, as I said, each one is unique and may have a different reason for why it may be considered today retroactively. Happy to provide that a summary of each of these to the board.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair. That was my observation on those.
Okay,
And
now which ones are you talking about? I've lost.
actually, we could go back to the original amounts that I pulled and vote on them individually.
1, 2, 3, 10, and 12?
1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15,
Didn't you pull
16, 19, and 20, and 21.
But if I may, Chair Bronson, I believe 5, 19, and 20 were pulled for additional discussion. So if you were to take the list provided by Supervisor Christie, less 5, 19, and 20, perhaps we could proceed.
We'll do the list. You want to do each of those separately?
Yes, please. Just the vote.
Okay.
Unless those that are pulled. I also pulled 5.
Let's go. I'll move number 1.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Objections? Hearing none, motion carries. I'll move item 2.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any objections? Hearing no objection, motion carries. I'll move item 3.
Second.
Motion and a second. Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 5, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Madam Chair?
Supervisor.
I would like to make a motion that...
There's a motion on the floor.
All right. Can I make a substitute motion?
Okay.
That this particular contract be extended, continued. This is with Goodman's Interior, first of all.
Goodman's.
Agreement number 6, Goodman's Incorporated, DBA, Goodman's Interior Structures, Corporate Interior Systems, National Design and Trade Network, Interior Solutions, and Omni Workspace Company, Atmosphere Commercial Interiors, to provide for furniture products and services. This amendment extends the termination date in the not-to-exceed amount of $19,380,000. What are we furnishing for all of that? So if I could...
You have a motion for continuance?
I do.
Is there a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. Supervisor Christie, did you want to?
I'm just dumbfounded that we're spending $19 million on a contract for furniture without any backup. What are we furnishing? That's all.
Who else pulled this item?
I did, Madam Chair, and it was just to ask a question. If you look at under procurement method, where it mentions all the different times that either the procurement director or the Board of Supervisors extended this item, there's a sentence that says, this extension is required for the continuation of goods and services and to allow the state of Arizona to resolicit a new cooperative contract. So my question is, what's the role of the state with this, and what is a cooperative contract? Is this a contract that we're working with other jurisdictions and the state is overseeing it? I was confused by the language and the role of the state.
Thank you. Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, we frequently, as a subdivision of the state, are able to enter into contractual agreements that have been initially procured by the state, thus expanding. Generally, we get a much better deal, frankly, because there's economies of scale. The state contracts are much larger in scope, therefore the cost per unit can be decreased, and we benefit from that for the taxpayers here.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor to approve. Are there any objections?
I object.
One objection. Any further objections? Motion carries. Moving on to item 6, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Madam Chair?
Supervisor.
This is for equipment for the Sheriff's Department. My question is this request of $143,000, is this over and above what was budgeted, or is it a new request, or why are we getting this request now and it wasn't included when we had the original budget?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, the amounts are included in the sheriff's budget. This is simply for this one specific contract. The amount has increased, and they're looking to continue, again, going to $270,000 for tactical equipment and supplies. It is within the overall budget of the sheriff's department. It's simply this one contract has exceeded the current contractual agreement limitation.
So it's over and above what was budgeted?
For that one contract.
For that one contract. And it was over budgeted for that one contract because?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I don't have the specifics. We're looking at tactical equipment and supplies. Historically, what we've seen this last year is a significant increase in supplies across the board.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, there was a motion on the floor to approve. Any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 10, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. What's the pleasure of the board? I think you pulled this one.
I think I did too.
What was that same issue?
Admin. Oh, no. The reason why I pulled this was because it was one of those administrative issues with the retroactive, so that's why I pulled it.
If there are no objections, motion carries. Moving on to item 12, I'll move the item.
Second.
Second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Chris.
Thank you. Madam Chair, looking at the background again on this, I'm just confused.
So am I.
The fiber optic cable project will install a county-owned fiber connection to the Keno South Sports Complex and provide infrastructure to install a future redundant connection to the Pima County Sheriff's Department headquarters building. Could we get an explanation what all that means?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, I will ask Mr. Holmes to speak to that issue. Thank you.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, this is part of the repair that was done with the line that was down, that was actually burnt, had to be replaced. And rather just replace it as is, they're creating a new line that could...
They're upgrading.
An upgrade from the current existing line. And the upgrades are so that this wouldn't happen again. Right now, if that line was cut and we lost services, by creating redundancy, meaning it has the opportunity to actually create a signal that we can tie into for the future in case that line goes down again.
So there was a line to the Keno Sports Complex in place, and then that was cut, or?
There was an existing line that actually got, that was severed. It was repaired, and this is just an extension of the repair to make it redundant so that we, in the future, can have some redundancy out there.
How does this tie into the Sheriff's Department at the Keno Sports Complex?
The way the line is going to be reconstructed allows us to create what we call redundancy networks. This is separate equipment, but it allows us to tie back into it. It ties into the sheriff only because the line will be stronger and have a better effect to tie back into to create that redundancy signal.
Thank you. Thank you.
There are no objections. Motion carries. Item 15, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Thank you. On item 15, this is an intergovernmental agreement or exchange agreement between the City of Tucson and Pima County, and it says that the county will acquire property from the city to build affordable housing opportunities for the community in exchange for unneeded county surplus property located in the Barrio Nopal neighborhood, allowing the city to create a public park. Why isn't the city creating its own affordable housing with this property? And this is within the City of Tucson. And why is the city using county property to generate a park?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, this is an exchange of property between the City of Tucson and Pima County.
Could you speak louder into the mic?
Sorry. Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, this is simply an exchange of property between the city and the county. The particular parcels that are involved that belong to the county were not amenable for any sort of residential development, and were part of the property that we own, and were identified as by the city as being an area that they were interested in developing a park. In exchange, we received 2 parcels consisting of 2 acres of land, also not far away from this same area. There are many different purposes that those parcels could be used, but one of the thoughts was that this could be land that would be amenable for affordable housing development. It does not mean, nor does it commit the county to develop it for that particular use, but it is simply taking one vacant property that is currently owned by the county, moving it over to the city, taking another property that's owned by the city and moving it over to the county. In the exchange, we actually, the value of the property that we receive exceeds the value of the property that we have conveyed to, that we would convey to the city.
So you could have eliminated the affordable housing piece and just done it as an exchange. Yet the affordable housing is a suggestion at this point, not a reality.
Correct.
All right. Okay, there's a motion on the floor to approve. Any further discussion? Any objections?
I object.
One objection noted. Any further objections? Motion carries. Moving on to item 16, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
Yeah, this is another city-county issue. And the sentence here that is troubling with the city and the Tucson, and maybe I could get clarity on which is which property is under which jurisdiction, but it says, the sale is being completed under threat of condemnation and is not a voluntary sale. Could we get an explanation on what that means?
So, Madam Chair, Supervisor Christie, this is related to the City of Tucson's Silverbell Road project. So, as the county has authority to condemn, so does the city. If we were not to cooperatively transfer or sell the property to the City of Tucson, the expectation is that they would move forward with condemnation so as to not disrupt the Silverbell roadway project. This is an RTA project, so we're understanding of the reality of what may happen if we weren't to cooperate.
Thank you.
All right. Any further discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item 19, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second.
Madam,
Did you?
We both did, Supervisor.
I'm sure you're sick of me talking, so you go ahead.
Thank you, Supervisor Christie. I had some questions probably best directed to Dr. Garcia. I'm assuming that this is the additional tranche of ERAP funds originally intended for the Arizona Department of Economic Security, and we applied for them and got them. Is that correct?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, you are correct.
Okay. And will we be using some of the community partners that we have used in the past to help get these funds out into the community?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, we have entered into contracts. You have approved those contracts, and those contractors who are the existing community partners are helping us move these dollars through this community.
Thank you. And then, and so those contracts that we approved were not just for the previous funds, but also for these funds?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, you are correct.
Okay. And then this question is a big one, but is there any estimate on the remaining community needs that ERAP funds could address and how these funds help us to meet them?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Scott, you're asking a really tough question.
I know,
which
sorry.
has to do, which is a very smart question, which has to do with what is the potential unmet need above and beyond those funds. And it's a question that's hard to answer because it is a dynamic one, and that is very sensitive to our sort of current, some of the vicissitudes of the economy currently as it's playing out here locally. We believe that these funds provide us sufficient resources to meet the needs of this community till about mid-February to late February. We know that, we believe that we will have unmet need after that time should we not be able to tap into further federal funding. I wish I could quantitate it for you further than that, but I know that we are currently continuing to receive about 100 inquiries per week. That's not applications, so those are inquiries from people who are concerned, who are feeling vulnerable in terms of their housing situation. Some of those folks end up being eligible for these resources, some of them do not. So we know that there is demand, and we are striving to figure out how to meet that demand when we run out of federal resources.
Dr. Garcia, thank you very much, and thank you, Madam Chair.
I think the issue is pretty well discussed from my standpoint.
Okay. Okay, if there's no further discussion, are there any objections?
I object.
One objection. Any other objections? One objection noted. Motion carries 4-1. Moving on to item 20, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Several of you put this on.
Yeah, I actually pulled it, and I think Supervisor Christie also did. I just wanted to highlight this grant and give an opportunity for staff to talk about what we might be doing specifically with this nearly $12 million in federal funding from the American Rescue Plan for the Health Department.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Grijalva, we are very fortunate to have been awarded this very large contract with the Centers for Disease Control. This program was developed by the federal government specifically to strengthen the capacity of the public health infrastructure in a post-COVID kind of setting. The idea is that we need to invest more in personnel resources in the human side of the infrastructure to be able to meet demands in the future. These resources specifically will allow us to expand our capabilities in epidemiology, consumer health and food safety, and as well as analysis. So we believe that this is going to be a very timely and appropriate investment that positions this county to continue to be a proactive responder.
Thank you.
Supervisor Christie?
Yeah, this basically is just to add more people to the Department of Health. There's a $11,900,000 and change grant here, and this is really creating permanent positions for temporary funding. What happens when this funding goes out and we've hired out of the $11,900,000, $11,300,000 is going to hire more people. I'm concerned that we're looking for a way to build up a department without it being sustainable. And this grant looks like it's only for 5 years, but we're talking hiring how many people?
I can't tell you off the top of my head. I believe that it is approximately 20 additional FTE.
20 additional people, and then when the grant money runs out, they'll just become institutionalized. So,
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, we were very clear when we have PCNs that are related to grants that those positions end when the grant funding ends.
So are you saying you have a plan in place when the money runs out?
Supervisor Bronson, Supervisor Christie, yes. When the grant runs out, those positions end. They are only here to fund and provide the services related to that grant and the receipt of those dollars.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Is there any, if there's no further discussion, I'll call the question. Any objections?
I object.
One objection noted. Any further objections? Motion carries 4-1. Item 21, I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Supervisor Christie.
And we're at the last one. There seems to be a new terminology that's cropping up in COVID testing and vaccinations. Tell me what traveler's health means.
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, we don't make up the language. The language is made up for us by the state. So this is what the state is calling this particular contract. ADHS has issued this intergovernmental agreement specifically to fund testing and treatment associated with individuals who are transiting through our community.
Is this specifically COVID related?
It is COVID related, yes.
And where are these venues for these travelers?
These venues are the existing venues that we have currently. So for us, this will support the healthcare services testing that we are providing for some of the asylum seekers. So there are no new venues, there are no new settings. This is simply a different fund source to offset the expenses associated with that activity.
And define for me once more, who is a traveler?
So again, this is terminology of the state, not terminology of our county. So they have worded this broadly enough to cover asylum seekers as well as refugees, as well as other people who are in transit.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Is there no further discussion? Are there any objections?
I object.
One objection noted. Any further objections? Motion carries 4-1. We're back on the regular agenda.
Do we want to discuss any other items?
It's about 10 or 11:15. You want to take a short break before we move, or you want to move on?
I'd like to move on, Chair Bronson.
You like? No, you've got all afternoon.
We don't.
Actually, we do. It's our job. Okay, moving on. Moving on to item 11. Unfinished business 2022 elections. Supervisor Christie.
Chair Bronson, I'd like to request, since staff is here, if they could do a presentation before we start asking questions.
That would be my request as well.
Thank you.
All right.
Chair Bronson, I do have a presentation.
You know what? Sorry I'm interrupting you, but we've got one item that we can deal with. This poor gentleman's been sitting here for a long time, and that's the appointment of a new constable, which I think should go fairly well since there's only one candidate, and that's Daniel F. Rowland II. This is appointment of a constable, Justice Precinct 1. I will move the appointment of Daniel F. Rowland.
I'll second.
For item 12?
Item 12,
okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
There's only one candidate. There's a motion and a second on the floor.
Chair Bronson, I did have a question. Does HR go through a background check process for these appointments?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is there a reason why we don't?
Not because it's an elected official.
Well, but again, we're appointing the elected official, and so since it's coming to the board.
Chair Bronson and Supervisor Grijalva, historically, we simply have not done that. If it is something that the board wished to include, these, I believe they go through the clerk of the board, we can certainly request that occur.
Yeah, I'm not specific to, I'm going to go ahead and approve this appointment, but I do think if it's coming to an appointment, it makes sense for us to do our due diligence and make sure that we're appointing people who don't have criminal backgrounds or that kind of thing. Okay, thank you.
All right, if there's no further discussion, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. Okay, back to item
Congratulations.
11.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, we are going to do, I guess, a presentation. Who's first?
That's me,
Okay.
Gabriela Castres-Kelly, Pima County Recorder. I do have a PowerPoint presentation that Nico has brought up for me. If you could go to the first slide, please. Just to give people a broad understanding of the timelines, we actually start our election period September 23rd of 2022, when we mail out the UOCAVA ballots. Those are the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Absentee Voting Act voters. So we send those out either by mail or email, and we will often receive a ballot back on the same day already voted. So that puts us in an early active election period. General election voter registration cutoff was Tuesday, October 11th. That's very significant in regards to the information for inactive and active voters and the distinction there. And the rest of those days, I believe, you're all familiar with. We immediately, the very next day after that voter registration cutoff, we mail out our active early voting list ballots. All of those ballots go out automatically for anyone who has signed up for the active early voting list, as well as anyone who has already submitted a request. At that point, we also open early in-person locations. These are basically extensions of our office, the downtown office, the country club office, and what was the east side, and we did replace that with another location. But those are basically extensions of our office to give access to those locations. And those are open for two weeks, and then we have a fourth additional location, which will be open for 2 weeks. And then the week of October 31st, we open the remaining 11 throughout the county. Those stay open, many of them until Saturday, November 5th, and Monday, November 7th. Earlier, there was a call to the audience asking about how we ensure early votes and election day votes don't get confused. I think it's very important for everyone to know that at 5 o'clock on November 7th, on a Monday, we then close our emergency voting for the day. And then we upload our information. We get that to the elections department. They receive our voter file with all information for who has already cast an early ballot and whose ballots we've already accepted. And then we pause. We do not do any turnovers until after Election Day. On Election Day, the Recorder's Office only supports the Elections Department by manning the phones and giving voter direct information. And then we resume only after we have received the voter file back, or the 10X information back from the Elections Department, at which time we can then ensure we have all information for all voters who have cast a ballot on Election Day, and that way, when we resume processing ballots, we can see who would have submitted to, and that way only one ballot gets submitted per person. Okay, next slide. Our active voters, we have 639,885 active voters with 65,187 inactive voters. Inactive voters are those who we have received back mail from. So we send out new voter ID cards.
You get return. The mail gets returned to you.
Yes, so if a piece of mail is returned to our office, it starts the inactivation process. We will then send them another letter, because sometimes it's something as simple as, a mailbox being too full or a forwarded address. all of the regular mail we can get forwarded to a new address if they have filed one through the United States Post Office. However, if they're simply not able to receive that mail, it gets sent back to us, and that person, it'll start the process for us putting them on the inactive list. That means that that person is still technically registered to vote, although they cannot do so until they have contacted our office and confirmed their address or updated their address with us.
And how are they to know that?
We send them the notice through the mail, and again, if that gets forwarded onto their new address, that's how it's taken care of. If it bounces back, they're unfortunately going to find out either because they haven't received their ballot and they're going to call our office, or they're going to show up on Election Day to cast a ballot, and they're going to find out that way too. But that just gives them an extra step where they just confirm their address, or they put in a new voter registration form to reactivate. They're fine. And so that's why that number there has been some distinction between the two. Customarily, in the past, we have seen reports from the Elections Department that have listed the active voters as opposed to the inactive voters, but we do have quite a number of people who give us a call and say, I looked online, I saw that I was inactive, what do I need to do? And most often it's an address update.
Madam Chair.
Supervisor.
Madam Recorder, is this inactive voter issue, is this defined in county procedure?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, pardon me. This is actually in state statute.
Can you get us the statute number?
We can after this meeting, yes. Next slide. For our active early voting list, we call these AVIL, our AVIL voters. We have 480,321. These are people who have opted to have a ballot mailed to them for every election that they are eligible for. In a primary.
Why did it, just out of curiosity, this used to be Pebble. How did it get its name changed?
There was legislation 2 cycles ago, where this was changed because what'll happen after this cycle, is it the cycle? 24? Very soon. There is now legislation that is in place which will, if a voter has not returned, it's very specific, if the voter has not returned a ballot in the 22, 23, or 24 cycle? Yeah, 24 cycle. If they had been mailed a ballot but not received that ballot back or used that mail ballot, so for example, if someone who receives an early ballot chooses to vote in person instead, so they're still a voter, by state law, we will then have to remove them from the active early voting list. So we will have to remove them from automatically receiving a mail ballot. However, they will still remain on the voting list. It will not impact their ability to vote. We just simply will not be mailing those out anymore. And so that is new legislation that has not fully been enacted yet, but we are making the switch to the active early voting list. It is no longer permanent.
Okay.
Okay. For voters that were not on the active early voting list, we do have the ability to request ballots. Anyone can do this. We do send out a mailer 90 days before, alerting people that they are registered, and if they would like to receive their ballot early, they can. We also have online requests. They can go through our website, fill out the appropriate information on our form, and we will send them a ballot that way, or they can give us a call and we can manually put that request in. And so we had 27,152 people for a total of 507,473 ballots requested. Next slide. Early voting behavior, we had 9,094 people vote at those 15 early voting locations. That was about 2.7% of all voters. But I think more importantly, it's really surprising to see the number of returned mail ballots at in-person drop-off locations, those 15 early voting sites, because Pima County does not have ballot drop boxes. These are the only places where you can return a ballot in person, and we received 42,507 over that 27-day early voting period, which was 12.79% of all ballots were returned in person. Return by mail was very significant. That is still, despite all of the concerns about the mail system, that is still where we receive the bulk of all of our ballots. 236,616 were returned, over 71% of all ballots. And I, of course, want to make sure that if there are any United States postal workers listening, make sure that we acknowledge their hard work, because it is a very tremendous lift. Those ballots, by the way, are picked up. They're specially cared for when they're in the hands of the U.S. Post Office, and our office picks those up, and we have couriers that make daily runs to secure those ballots, and we pick them up ourselves. For late early ballots returned.
Let me interrupt, just this is an auditing question. So you pick them up. You have people from your office appointed to pick them up. How do we know whatever you pick up, how have you audited that to know that? Does the post office provide you with that number, and then you verify it?
Yes. So, Chair Bronson, we receive receipts from the U.S. Post Office for the number of pieces of mail, and then we have two couriers of opposite party, a Republican and Democrat, or whatever, whoever is available. But we do have. We do have teams of people who go and do that daily run. They bring it back, and all of those ballots are then processed and scanned, and we're able to compare those postal receipts with our scanned receipts.
Okay.
Madam Chair, along those same lines, do you have a total amount that were returned in that manner?
236,616.
Okay, over 200,000 were undeliverable.
No, those were all delivered to, pardon me, those were all picked up from, that's our standard procedure.
Oh, I see. Thank
you. We pick them up.
Gotcha.
And we receive those postal receipts. We're in very high communication with the post office during that time period. Our ballot processing manager receives those receipts daily, and that actually helps us plan because we need to determine how big of a vehicle we need, if we need a larger vehicle, if we need multiple runs, that we receive those numbers and we make decisions based on those numbers. We then also received 44,102 late early ballots returned on Election Day, and which were delivered by the Elections Department. In total, the number of early ballots returned to our office was 332,318 ballots. I do want to make sure that anyone who's looking and trying to add up these numbers are aware that all ballots are processed, but not all ballots are validated. Once in a while, we will receive ballots with no signature, and maybe this cycle in particular, we received ballots, just ballots in the mail without an envelope, with no identifying information. But that will be counted as a piece of mail, which we then cannot validate in any way. Or we might receive a return envelope, and we open up that return envelope, and inside is a City of Tucson ballot from 2 years ago with a ballot from 2 years ago. We always open in that situation. We'll double check to make sure, well, is this a ballot for this current election? And sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't. So those numbers are just the influx of what we receive in. Again, they are processed, but that number will not necessarily equal a total in valid votes. So the next slide, early ballots voted in Pima County, 331,304. That is 82% of all voting in Pima County happens early. For provisional ballots that were verified, there was 1,831, which is 0.45%, and ballots voted on Election Day, 70,421,000. That makes up about 17%, 17.45% of all voting. And total ballots cast, verified, and tabulated in Pima County, 403,556, of course, which gets turned over to the elections department. So oh, I'm sorry. May I have the next slide, please? There, that's the information that I just shared. Sorry. I need new glasses. And the next slide, please. So just for general election comparisons, you'll see I have numbers listed for the 2018, 2020, and 2022 general elections. And you'll see the most recent total mailed early ballots in the far right-hand corner, 507,473. Total early ballots verified, 331,304. And you can see obviously the 2020 was a presidential election year. You see there's a significant increase, and that's around what we're expecting, if not more, for the 2024 cycle. But what is most exciting is the number of provisional and conditional provisional ballots that were issued in 2018. We see that number in a comparable election as being 18,359 in compared with our general election provisional and conditional 2,561 ballots. That is a significant reduction in the number of provisional ballots that were issued and that we then needed to process. Next slide. Our overall Pima County turnout, there's a little bit of explanation for this. In reviewing the 2018 general election official canvass provided by Pima County Elections Department, they used the number 557,532. That is their number of active voters, and that's the number that they used to calculate turnout, which at that point was 70.55%. In 2020, we see that number being 82.45%. And this year, for the official canvass, the number that was used was the inactive voter number, which again, those voters are eligible to vote. That is still within a general understanding. However, we have two numbers there. If we compare it with just the active voters, that turnout was a 63.6% turnout. But if we compare it with the inactive, it's the active and inactive.
You mean what you're doing to get to the 57 is you're taking total voters and including inactive in that. Is that correct?
Yes. And of course, those numbers, those are the numbers, again, with the explanation of the active
Which of
and
those
inactive
numbers
voters.
gets reported? The press reports or what we hear at the state level in terms of Pima County turnout.
Thank you, Chair Bronson, the numbers that are reported to the Secretary of State are both the active and inactive numbers. So
Okay,
Pima
that
County
is-
provides both sets of numbers to the Secretary of State. On the Secretary of State's statewide canvas, they only used Pima County's active numbers. They did that for all of the counties, but both sets of numbers were provided. For Pima County's canvas, we used the total number of voters, which included the active number and inactive number.
You've answered that perfectly. Thank you.
Okay, and we just had a few, so that is the overall information. That is all the numbers that were provided in the report that was given to you before the new year. Yes. So I just have a few highlights that I want to share. So next slide, please. Next slide. So some of the efforts that we've made in our office, and I'll go through these very, very quickly. If you have additional questions, we can talk about that later. But one of the things that we did was we restructured our training for staff. We have made our trainings more hands-on. We have provided additional accessibility, subject matter expert speakers, longer training sessions, provided additional resources and materials that have all been revised to be more user-friendly. So there's a picture of one of our trainings there. Next slide. We launched the Track My Ballot alert feature for email or text messages, and we were able to sign up over 9,000 people to automatically receive an alert on by text or by email when we mail out their ballot, when we receive their ballot, when their ballot has been signature verified, and when it has been turned over to the elections department, which is the last step. We stop track. We're only able to track it by the ballot affidavit. So once it makes it to the elections department, it can no longer be tracked. But that is for the early voters who are able to sign up for those text or email alerts. It is one phone number or one email per person. And if there are voters who are struggling with that, signing up through our website, they can give us a call and we can enter that manually for them. But that was very successful. We had a really positive community response. People did like it if they felt that their votes were on their way to being counted, and it provided a sense of security for them. We included early voting frequently asked questions and early voting site information in the ballot packet. So it had, where you can drop off this ballot, and frequently asked questions such as who am I able to give my ballot to, which would be a household member or a caregiver or spouse. We also participated in the Text to Cure system, which is for ballots that required a signature follow-up through a free program through the Secretary of State's office. So if we had trouble reading a signature or it wasn't 100% matching, we could then contact the voter and they could send us an updated signature with proof of identification, usually a driver's license, and send that to us electronically rather than waiting on the line and do that phone call and try to get through on our lines that way. And that was really successful. That was our first time utilizing that program, which again was free through the Secretary of State's office, and which we hope to participate in that again. And it was very successful. It reduced the number of times that we needed to contact voters directly. We have made several changes to our website. Oh, next slide, please. We have made several changes to our website, including boosting where we have listed the accessible voting services. So it's the very first button when you click on voter information. The very first thing is accessibility, which highlights some of the services that many people don't know that we offer. Next slide. some of them being large print and braille ballots. If you look at the photo on your left, the ballot, there's one large ballot and there's a smaller ballot. The smaller ballot is a standard size ballot. I believe that one was 14 inches as opposed to the 2 foot, the 2 foot long ballot on the very far left. Both of those are designed by the Elections Department, and the Elections Department provides that to our office, and we prepare a packet with additional large print materials. We call the voter, and then we mail them that ballot. On the right-hand side, you will see a braille ballot. That is also printed through, designed and in conjunction with the Elections Department and Arizona School for the Deaf and Blind. They have a service, a transcription service, and they provide the ballots to us, and we assemble the packages within in-house, contact the voter, and mail those ballots off as well. And if there are people who are wanting to receive either of those ballots, they simply have to give our office a call, or if they are registering to vote, they can simply write on the form, large print or braille or whatever, and communicate that with us, and we will get that as an automatic. Next slide. For accessible voting services, we have at every location wheelchair accessible voting booths. You'll see one to the far left in that left photo. People were saying, well, it's not really comfortable. It's really hard sometimes to stand for a really long time, and I need an accessible booth, but it's not really practical for me. And a lot of the people that were coming in are elders who needed to sit, so they requested tables. And so on the far right, you'll see that as a standard, it's a very simple modification that we have. We just put a table with chairs and privacy screens, and that was much appreciated, especially by elders, but anyone who was coming in. One of the coolest things that I saw while I was out working at one of the sites was a mother who brought in her 2 children using a wagon, and she was holding a baby and voting. And at one point, I just happened to glance over, and she's breastfeeding. She has the 2 kids in the wagon. She's voting, and I thought, oh my gosh, too bad we can't take photos in here of this amazing moment of accessibility. But it's tremendous, and that was a simple, cost-effective, easy change that helped people for a very long ballot. So we're going to plan on having that in the future as well. Next slide. And then we spent a lot of time talking about the express voting machines. These are ballot marking devices, and these are provided by the Elections Department, and our office has spent a great deal of time increasing our familiarity and comfort level with these machines. You insert a piece of cardstock ballot in there, and this has a joystick, it has a touch screen, it has headphones. If a blind user wants to use this and turn off the screen, they can do so. It's very accessible. We had, people who were saying, I have arthritis, I can't really mark the little circles, or I didn't bring my readers and I'm struggling to see. There's so much stuff on here, and it will read it. It will allow people to make a choice or select or deselect an option. There's an opportunity for them to make any revisions before they print this. And this was really accessible. This is actually how I choose to vote early within my personal voting choice. And so the next slide, please. I do just want to highlight team voting. Team voting is simply This is a situation, it's a very limited opportunity for voters who are otherwise unable to vote in person. So this might be somebody who's unexpectedly in the hospital, or someone who is in the jail, or somewhere where they are not able to leave their home easily, and has absolutely no other choice on how they will cast their ballot, and it's beyond the time period for them to receive and return a ballot in time. We actually will have two-person teams, especially with the help of the assessor's office, who was able to loan us some of their folks. I really want to make sure I thank the assessor for that, because they were tremendous and were able to go out to constituents' homes or to their hospitals and help them cast their ballot there. Sometimes what it is they'll just bring the ballot and the person is able to physically complete everything by themselves. Sometimes they will need assistance with somebody verbally saying, this is the selection I would like, and then marking it. That's why we have, by state law, a Republican and a Democrat attending those. And we also we're providing that information. Some of those teams would have Spanish speakers as well, to ensure that we had translation services available if that was needed. We had 29 voters who voted in this way, and they're usually identified when they call through to the office, and they're explaining a situation where they're trying to figure out how they can vote, and then we will refer them to our program, and we'll have them discuss and make sure that there is no other option for this person, and then schedule an appointment and deploy that early voting team, that special board team. The next slide. The last things, of course, I did mention the sign up for text message alerts to track your ballot on our website, and people can do that at recorder.pima.gov. And I just wanted to throw out some important dates that are upcoming. Of course, we have the City of Tucson primary in 2023. We have the City of Tucson General. So those will be coming up shortly. I didn't have the dates available for those. August and November. And then the possible Vail Incorporation election, November 2023. That's that has not been finalized. However, the presidential preference election is in March of 2024. That is 14 months from now. Because our office deals with the 27 days prior to the election, we're actually looking at 13 months. So we are 13 months away from the 2024 election cycle. And we are stressing that information as much as possible to make sure that people understand we are in a time crunch already. There's this false illusion of 2 years in between the congressional federal election and the presidential. The primary election will be in August 2024, and the general election November 5th, 2024. And so with that, I do want to take just a quick moment to make sure that I thank the many different departments who helped the Recorder's Office, the fleet, facilities, human resources, procurement, the Pima County Libraries, which were generously hosting our locations for up to 7 days. Our communications department, which did a really tremendous job with our website and the maps that were so helpful, and also our phone systems, the county assessor's office, the county attorney's office, and of course the elections department, who did a really wonderful job of communicating with us. Every ballot that we received, we were sending to them, and we want to thank everyone for their continued support. It takes many, many departments to make this happen, and we see now more than ever that people do care greatly about their most fundamental of rights, and we're very happy here in Pima County to see so many people excited to participate in our democracy, and we look forward to a positive 2024. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Christie.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Recorder. Couple of questions.
Sure.
Just a curiosity, I guess, more than anything, but it nonetheless has some significance. When vote-by-mail ballots are returned to the recorder's office deemed undeliverable, what happens to them and where do they go? And what sort of accounting for them is there?
Thank you, Chair Bronson. Supervisor Christie, election mail is not forwardable, as you know, so undeliverable ballots we get back. We log all of the undeliverable ballots. We put note codes in the voter registration file, and that starts the inactivation process for us.
And then what happens to the ballots?
The ballots are part of the election material, so they are archived and follow the same retention as a voted ballot would.
And they're archived for how long?
2 years after a congressional election.
Okay, so they are individually looked at and accounted for and archived.
Correct.
And the original is saved.
Correct.
Thank you. What types of security protections are in place to safeguard the private voter information and the voter database when the contractor Philios LLC is accessing this information from his private residence? What type of security protections are in place to safeguard private voter information?
Thank you, Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie. Our voter registration database sits on our network that is internally housed here in Pima County. Our contractor that you're referring to is a database administrator, and he is only responsible for ensuring the database operations. He does not have access to the actual content of the database.
So he has no contact with the database. That's all under the protection of the recorder's office.
Correct. As I stated, our contractor, Philios, is our database administrator contractor. He is simply doing contractual work related to the Oracle database, which the voter registration database sits on. He is not doing any sort of work on the voter registration database itself.
And the database that he does have contact with, what does that entail?
The Oracle database is simply, it's a different sort of service. There's a SQL database structure, and then there's an Oracle database structure. Right. We employ an Oracle database structure for our voter registration database and for our proprietary recording database at the moment. So both of those databases sit on this particular structure, which is the Oracle structure. And the databases themselves sit on a structure, but the database administrator is not accessing the applications or the content within the voter registration database.
And after the election cycle is ended, what does the contractor, what happens to what he's been doing? What happens to him?
So he is a maintenance contractor for the Oracle structure, not for the database, for the Oracle structure. So again, the voter registration database is an application. It has a database that's attached to it, which is the voter registration files that sits on the Oracle structure. And it's the contractor who ensures that the full Oracle database structure is operating fully. So it's making sure that it has appropriate memory, that it's running the appropriate maintenance on it. It has nothing to do specifically with the voter registration database or the contents related in the voter registration database.
So after the election, he just turns the lock and key and walks out, or?
No, Supervisor Christie. The voter registration database is a dynamic database. It's always being updated. So the contractor that you are referring to does maintenance work only on our Oracle structure. We have a developer that is actually responsible for maintaining the application of the voter registration.
So his job just doesn't end at the end of the election?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, that contractor in particular, Thelios, number one, was a former employee and had gone through the Pima County background checks and have gone through all of the contractual requirements to ensure that that they abide by legal behavior. In addition to that, we have been utilizing that contractor mostly to support the Doris system, which is actually on the recording side of the house. We are working on phasing out, as you know, our Doris system and moving to Tyler, which is recording software. When we are able to fully move away from Tyler, we will no longer need that consultant, at which point we will discontinue that contract. As you know from our previous conversations regarding that contract and the limitations that we have there. So it is a minimal support until we're able to move away from that system. So, but it is more closely related to the recording side of the house and not necessarily impacting the elections side or the voter side as much.
Okay. And just to affirm...
Actually, I want some clarification. You seem to equivocate a little bit about whether it was just for the recording side or came into the voting side. Can you clarify?
It's kind of like having a roof on your house, and maybe the structure that is protecting is on one side of the house, but overall it impacts the entire house. And so that's kind of the situation with...
You've confused me even further.
I apologize, Chair Bronson. What I'm saying is the Oracle database is needed for the recording application called Doris, which we are moving away from. Because it is within our entire system, it is important to both the voter side and the recording side. However, it is mostly utilized on the recording side, if that helps.
Actually, it didn't, but let's move on.
Thank you.
Very, very quickly, we do understand, or we need an affirmation, I guess, that any changes to processes and procedures requires legislation and an election procedures manual update, correct?
Yes and no. Yes, that is the basis for what we are working on, is the elections procedures manual. However, the Attorney General and the previous Attorney General and the previous Governor did not sign off on the last elections procedures manual, which did not allow us to use the most up-to-date version. By state statute, those versions are it's intended that they're updated on the off-cycle years, and that was not the situation, and so we had to use an earlier version with updates through the county attorney's office. And so those, although the recorders and elections directors and the Secretary of State's office are meeting regularly to interpret some of those laws, it still will basically go through the county attorneys for each jurisdiction separately, as opposed to one unified document, and that's what we go by.
And you think by the next election cycle, this will be updated?
I'm hoping so. The Recorders Association in particular, we will meet very regularly and provide input, all 15 county recorders, 9 of which are Republicans, 1 independent, and 5 Democrats. And for the most part, it is very congenial. We agree. We complicate some issues sometimes and try to make it as helpful for all counties, both big and small. And we try to negotiate and talk about language that best suits our jurisdictions. And it has been very diplomatic. It's very good process that we've been doing, and that's in conjunction with the Secretary of State's office. And then the elections directors, I know, do a similar process, and we do overlap every once in a while and need to confer with one another there. But it is a really good process, and I do feel confident that with the new Attorney General and the new Secretary of State and Governor, that is something that will be approved.
And the final thing that I would request, and this would go to Ms. Hargrove as well, is when the new voting center system was presented to the board, it was touted as a cost-effective savings. There would be a lot of savings involved. You all, this was all presented to us, I believe, about a year ago. The 10X equipment, the annual cost, and the annual cost of vote center model, the original effort to quantify how much it's going to cost. We need to have a new column, what the actual was along those lines. Could we have that provided to us?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, absolutely. There is actually a problem with a portion of it for elections because the portion of the savings wasn't quantified. There wasn't any variables there to tell me where those savings would come from. But I can provide and enumerate where I see those savings for you guys. But I just want to let you know that there wasn't anything there to tell me where the cost savings would come from. I'm assuming it was poll workers. The reduction of the number of locations, you would save money on poll workers.
Do you anticipate tangible savings that will show?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, absolutely. What we will see the savings in mostly is from my proposal of the contingency plan using express votes, where we will not be ordering those ballots. We spent a lot of money in ballots, and there's going to be a significant savings in that area.
Okay. I look forward to seeing the final tally. Thank you, Madam Chair.
And then I have, both of you were here, but I'll defer to the recorder first. We had a number of people speak at Call to the Public. You were here for that. They brought up some real issues that I thought were significant. How are you going to address those issues moving forward, Madam Recorder? Specifically, the early voting sites and problems.
Chair Bronson, I'm not aware of specific issues that were brought up for early voting, other than a slight delay in the at the Green Valley location. We reported very smooth early voting. A very smooth cycle. I have not been made aware of any specific complaints. But
well, there were 3 here today.
Right. So one of the ones that was a concern were how were we ensuring that I guess this is an elections question, but how were we ensuring that people were not casting 2 votes? And I explained that at the beginning of my presentation, that we take a pause in that process, so we don't turn over any ballots to Elections Department on Election Day. We hold everything that we have until we have received the file that shows us who has cast a vote before we send anything over. So because of our delay and our pause that we take in processing those ballots and turning those over, I think that's simply something that that constituent didn't quite understand. The other issues that were brought up had to do with vote centers on Election Day. And my office only facilitates early voting, and we are responsible for the voter file that is provided on the e-poll books, but Election Day is facilitated by the Elections Department.
Madam Chair, would you be willing to review some election issues and send them on to you for your review and your response?
Of course.
Thank you.
And then, what could you do better next time? How can you improve?
We have spent, Chair Bronson, thank you. We have spent so much time after this election debriefing with our staff members, with each of the different units within the elections process. We have met and spoken with our ballot processors, our signature verifiers, our site monitors, our couriers, our administration, and also reviewing the different functions throughout that we're responsible for, starting with petition signature verification and the overlap of those functions as well, and data entry. So we have been spending quite a bit of time debriefing and coming up with solutions for moving forward for 2024. We are really, again, I'm working with the county administrator and reaching out to facilities in regards to our issues that we're dealing with in regards to space. There have been requests from the public, and we see there's data available. It does make sense for us to expand the number of early voting sites to make those more accessible. However, we are concerned about spacing issues and storage issues with that equipment, and so we are looking at that. Of course, we see improvements in staffing and how we can staff, additional trainings for our phone operators. That is a really important one, especially as we have seen with this national conversation in election denying, people angry on our phones, and how, when we get abusive phone calls, making sure that our staff members are understand what is appropriate and what is not, and being able to protect themselves and reduce the stress of our staff, and still serve the constituents. We have really big plans on continuing the outreach efforts and communication of our office. And that's all I can think of off the top of my head. We have a lot of big plans.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Would you remind me when you mentioned the phones? We received over 20 complaints at our office that when they were trying to reach you, they were put on hold and nobody got back to them. They couldn't leave a message. And that was pretty much consistent when we got calls. So I don't know.
Chair Bronson, do you know in what timeline or at what portion of time that was happening?
I was out throughout the whole early voting.
Chair Bronson, in the primary election, we were struggling. We did not have the adequate number of people assigned to the phones. We were juggling people around, and what we were able to do to respond to that is we worked with the communications department and our IT department. The IT department, and were able to change our outgoing message to frequently asked questions, and that's something that we did throughout the election cycle that really improved. We could actually see the numbers of people listening 30 seconds in, hearing the answer to their question, and then hanging up, which reduced that wait time. People were asking common questions. We also increased the visibility of the frequently asked questions on our website, as well as increase our social media output regarding those, so that when people called, they may have their questions answered from that outgoing message alone, and then provided those additional formats. And so we did see an improvement prior to the general election with our phone usage, but we do have.
Did your phone systems ever go down like ours did?
No, we did not. we were able to maintain, and we felt really good about, there's a lot that happens with odd hours when we have extended deadlines, or if we're working on a weekend, and who's turning the phones on and that sort of thing. And so we really paid special attention to a lot of those details to make sure that people were able to communicate with us as easily as possible. And we wanted to reduce the frustration that voters felt when calling into our office, and we were really trying to be mindful of that.
Well, we'll see what the next election cycle brings. This was a learning curve for all of us. It was a new system. Hopefully, we'll see an improvement come 2024, and to some extent in 2023 with the city elections. So, thank you,
Madam Chair.
Supervisor.
It wouldn't be a proper or complete elections discussion if I did not ask Ms. Hargrove, now that the election cycle is over, ma'am, how are your sleeping patterns?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie. My sleeping patterns are fine. Interestingly enough, my brain doesn't shut off, though. So, there's always something in my head that I'll wake up and I'm like, I should have had a piece of paper beside me because I should have wrote that down, something to do with the election. But if you would permit me, I would like to elaborate on what the recorder spoke about with early ballots on Election Day. And I have actually been speaking with Ms. Heiser about having a meeting so that we can understand the workflow that is required by the recorder's office, so that elections and the recorder understand on Election Day how the equipment actually is going to work. And because we train to the workflow that is there, and if we do not train properly, then the ballots will not be issued properly. But to speak to the early ballot process, it is statutorily required that we issue a voter a ballot if they come in and they've been issued an early ballot. We have to issue them a regular ballot. The system catches that, and as the recorder said, they are holding ballots that they receive in the mail or that are dropped off after the last update to the voter registration database that we use on Election Day. So they verify the information. They did catch some, because I read their report. There were some individuals who submitted 2 ballots, so they did catch some that actually came in and voted on Election Day, but they also actually mailed in their ballot. They probably were concerned that it wasn't going to get there in time. So I just wanted to add that to...
How does that get resolved?
How is it resolved?
Yeah, when you've got the 2 ballots.
Thank you, Chair Bronson. When a voter casts 2 ballots, the system itself has a fail-safe. So if we have received the ballot in hand before we do the final update for elections, then on Election Day it'll say that voter A has returned their early ballot. It's been accepted by the county recorder's office, and the poll worker at the vote center will say to the voter, we have noticed that you've returned your early ballot and that the recorder's office has received your ballot. Now, if the voter tells the poll worker that's not true, You cannot turn away a voter, so every voter has the right to vote. So even if they argue with a poll worker because the system says that they've received that ballot, that poll worker will give them a provisional ballot. So we will get that provisional ballot the very next day. So after every person who casts an in-person vote on Election Day, that uploads to the file on the morning after. We get that file from Ms. Hargrove and her team, and then we upload it into our system. So we will upload and show everybody who has cast a ballot at a vote center. As we start to process through any returned ballots that we received by drop-off, so if a voter dropped off their returned ballot, and voted at a vote center, we will catch that, and we have. If the voter has dropped off, if the voters voted in person and we had their mail ballot and we just hadn't processed it at the time before we updated the file, their ballot that they voted at the vote center, that's the ballot that counts. Their mail ballot is then disqualified. So the system does catch it. We catch everybody who has cast 2 ballots. 1 ballot is always disqualified. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and you're always, your explanations are right on point. Thank you.
Madam Chair, one quick question, Ms. Hargrove. We've talked about this before. Have you considered having online testing for poll workers post-training as they used to in the past?
I'm sorry, I don't quite understand the question.
Have you considered having poll worker testing post-training?
Chair Bronson, Supervisor Christie, that is a good question, and yes, I definitely have considered that. There is actually an 8-hour class that poll workers can take. Is a certification class that they're required to be tested. I have tested poll workers in the past. I've had experienced poll workers fail the test more than 3 times.
Wow.
And which is why I'm hesitating. Yes, test is really good, but I believe those individuals that we certify, and those are the ones that will be responsible for the vote center on Election Day, should definitely be tested, so they understand what's going on and they can train and oversee the entire process.
I just bring that up, as we all recall, the training was a very significant issue with a lot of voters and poll workers, so this might be an aid for that.
Yes, sir. Definitely, training is on my top of my list to address and make sure that we are meeting the needs of all of the poll workers. Yes, sir. I know there was a request that I provide information today. I know it's late, and what is the pleasure of the board?
I'd like to hear the info.
Okay. Yes, ma'am, Chair Bronson. So the information that was requested was about the recount, and of course there was a recount held for the 2 statewide offices, the Secretary, the Attorney General, and the Superintendent of Public Education. And the recount actually went very well. We anticipated that we would need an entire week to conduct the recount, but we met a few times. We came up with a process. We had a team approach, and it worked out very well, and we were able to conduct the entire recount within 3 days. Wow. Which is awesome. So we conducted the recount in 3 days. Everything went very well. We did have the hand count audit at the end of that. There were some changes in some of the numbers. The majority of those changes were from undervotes, that no vote was counted for a particular candidate, and it was in the superintendent's race, not the attorney general's race. And so it was about 12 votes. So the net change was 11 votes. But other than that, that was within reason. There was nothing strange about what happened during the recount. There was actually a set of ballots that just did not want to run through the scanner, and that whole set of ballots had to be duplicated. So they go to a team that actually uses the express vote to create a new ballot so that it will run through the scanner. So the recount went very well, and there were no problems with that. And you have a full report of all of the precincts. That's why it's so large. And then we had the election contest. The Hamaday campaign filed a contest, and they did discovery in Pima County. They looked at over 200 ballots, and they did not find any discrepancies in the votes on those ballots. So they were looking for ballots that were duplicated. So there was a process to duplicate ballots, and there are teams of different political party members that actually duplicate the ballots. And if that process is not followed, and the interpretations can be different. People look at ballots in the way that individuals mark ballots, and they may interpret them a little differently. So what happened when they looked at these ballots, they felt that the interpretations that the team made were correct. And so there were no changes to anything in Pima County, and we were very pleased with that. So the contest went forward. They had the hearing. The judge found that he did not prove his case, and so there was nothing done with that. And I believe he has now filed another motion.
Of course.
Yes, another motion to look at more ballots and have a new election for his office. And so those were the recount and the contest. I provided you some information as I was going through looking at the data that I had, and it was very interesting and telling to me because I wanted to see where the lines were and where we had lines, why we had those lines. And it's very telling that the new technology has improved efficiency, so they can check the voters in very quickly, but then they have nowhere to go to mark their ballots. So typically we send 15 secrecy voting booths to each vote center. And we were checking in, if you would go through and look at the data that I provided, in some locations they were checking in over 100 people an hour, and it was constant throughout the day. And so what I have to do now is take a look at not only adding more voting booths to those locations, but making sure that the location, the vote center itself, can accommodate those additional voting booths that we're going to put there. And so I will need to come back before you and provide information, and I'll just put this out here. I'll provide information to Ms. Lesher quarterly so that you can get updates on where I am in the process and where we may be with adding additional vote centers or changing vote centers and equipment and anything of that nature, because I think it's important that you see the process as it moves forward and not just at the end where I come and say, we do need to add this vote center, but you don't know how I arrived at that decision. So there will be some locations where we will want to add, I believe, an additional location, not move it because we are seeing that the voters actually like the location. So we don't want to just move the location. We want to add another location so that we can accommodate those voters. And so what I want to do is try to take a look at some of the 10X reports and data to see what precincts these voters are actually from. And if I can determine that, then I can best determine where I might want to put another vote center to accommodate them. So that was very eye-opening and enlightening, and I'm really more impressed with the poll workers now because They actually worked very hard. They were very creative. They found tables for voters to mark their ballots. They did whatever they could to accommodate the voters. So I'm very impressed with the poll workers and the decisions that they actually made to make sure that voters were accommodated on Election Day. And so if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Any other further questions? All right, you're home. You're free to go. And thank you for the report. And as I said earlier, this was a learning curve. We learned, and so hopefully 2024 will be less hectic and run more smoothly. But thanks. Looks like we had a fair and clean election. Thanks to your work. Thank you.
Chair. Can you send us the attachment that you presented here so we can put it on the items?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's it? All right, thank you. We'll now move back to our regular agenda. And now we're on 13. We already did 12. This is contribution to National Association of Counties, National Center for Public Lands, Counties. Supervisor Scott, you put this on the agenda?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move the item. At least for discussion purposes.
I'll second for discussion purposes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, as you know, I am the county's representative to the County Supervisors Association Legislative Policy Committee, and it was as part of that I heard about a presentation that the County Supervisors Association was doing on October 31st at the behest of both the National Association of Counties and also the Western Interstate Region Board of Directors. Thank you. And the presentation was done by our Executive Director, Craig Sullivan, and also the two supervisors who represent us on the Western Interstate Region Board of Directors. That'd be Supervisor Lunt from Greenlee County and Supervisor Horstman from Coconino County, who is the alternate. And if you look at the PowerPoint that was attached to this item, the objectives for this center are to enhance the understanding of national, state, and county policymakers and influencers of the unique policy and practice issues facing America's county officials in areas with federal public lands, to develop the policy and practice research, case studies, public forums, and learning networks necessary to advance and inform our nation's policies and practices, and to foster intergovernmental relationships and dialogue on the intersection of federal, state, and local policy making and practices. There are a significant number of states, Arizona included, especially in the western part of the country, that have public lands. And what was proposed by the County Supervisors Association was that we use a general fund equivalent of our Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund, 1% of the 2-year allocation from that Local Assistance and Tribal Consistency Fund. And if you go to the chart that shows how much Arizona counties will be contributing, there'd be just a little bit more than $1.1 million coming out of Arizona to help capitalize this center. And the cost for Pima County over a 2-year period would be a little bit more than $79,000 because that's 1% of our total allocation from that fund. This is a significant priority not only for the County Supervisors Association, but also for the National Association of Counties and the Western Interstate Region Board of Directors. And Arizona has been asked to get back to both those national organizations by the end of the month as to the cooperation from all of our counties. And there was significant support from all 15 counties noted at this informational meeting that I attended. I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair, that you or my colleagues may have.
In the past, the out counties have not been particularly comfortable with this.
The out counties?
The rural counties.
Well, Supervisor Lunt is from Greenlee County, and he's our representative to the Western Interstate Region Board of Directors. And I can certainly tell you that there was a great deal of support expressed at that October 31 meeting, and there were representatives from almost every county at that meeting, including from the rural counties.
Chair Bronson?
Supervisor
So
Cahoba.
this nearly 80,000, it'll be 40,000 per year?
Yes, ma'am.
And I guess I just want to make sure that the other counties are going to be participating before we say, yes, we're in. So
Contingent upon.
Yeah, I just want to have some buy-in from everyone else so it's not, Pima County. Because I do think that we have some amazing experts within Pima County, and I think that we can add a lot to this discussion. But if not all the other counties are participating, it would make more sense for us to sort of continue to do what we're doing and put that funding towards buying more land or something. Yeah.
We are in total agreement.
Okay.
I know that each county was asked to get back to the state association by the end of the month as to their participation. I don't know right offhand what each of the other 14 counties have done, but I do know that there was significant support for the endeavor expressed at this October 31 meeting. And the vast majority of counties were represented at that meeting.
Why don't we do this? It's a thought. Why don't we continue this item to our next board meeting? Because you said the end of the month?
Yes, ma'am.
And then perhaps you can get the information that Supervisor Grijalva has requested. And I have one more concern as we head into our next budget cycle, where we're going to see decreased funding at the federal level for some of our objectives. We have a fund balance that I'm not happy with. Any use of the general fund is of concern to me, because we can't meet our needs down here right now.
Madam Chair, I am happy to continue the item until January 24 because that will still give us a week to get back to the state association. So if it's okay with you as the seconder, I'll remove my motion and move to continue the item to January 24.
It's fine with me. I'll second that. Okay.
Thank you. And I will get that information from Mr. Sullivan or somebody else with the association.
All right.
Thank you, Supervisors.
Moving on to County Administrator's update.
Madam Chair, in light of the hour, I will forego the report. I will encourage you to take a moment and look at a story about Suzanne Shields that we do have up after been with the county since 1978, is our hydrologist and a leader of the flood control district, and is leaving the director's seat but staying with the county. Please take a moment. She's had an extraordinary career with us.
She has been there longer than I have. What did you say? Okay. That's it with your update? Okay. Then item 15 has been continued till February 7th. Item 16, anti-racketeering revolving fund. What's the pleasure of the board?
Chair Bronson, I historically have not voted for this item, but I do know, because I had an opportunity to visit the IMU 360, their newest safe housing site, that they are a 501c3 and they've already received funding from the city. So I know that they've gone through that background process. So I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Office of Sustainability and Conservation, conservation easements. What's the pleasure of the board? Item 17.
I'll move the item.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? Any objection? Hearing none, motion carries. Item 18, waiver of rights to approve amendments. Supervisor Scott.
I'll move the item, but I also have a question for Mr. DeBonis.
Okay, I'll second.
Mr. DeBonis, why were we granted these rights in 1978, and what is the benefit to the county in waiving these rights?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, I was a wee lad in 1978, not in Pima County either. So generally, Pima County doesn't have a role in private covenants, conditions, and restrictions. So by waiving the right to amend it, that puts us in line with what the standard practice is.
So nothing particular in the history as to why we were granted these rights in the first place?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Scott, not that I'm familiar with.
All right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
All right. Moving on. Oh, did we take the vote? We didn't vote. Let's vote. Are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. All right. These are hearings. Franchises, license, and permits, items 19 through 23. And this is, well, the first one's the bingo license, but apparently we're going to have a lot of fireworks because 2021 and 22 and 23 are fireworks permits. And once again, we haven't gotten all the rain we need, and we hope that the fire departments in these instances are copacetic with this, but these are hearings. Is there anyone in the audience who wishes to address us on these items at this time? If not, I move to close public hearings and approve the items 19 through 23.
Second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion, any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. And we now are on item 24, my favorite part of the meeting. Adjournment. If there are no objections, this meeting stands adjourned. And at our next meeting, Supervisor Grijalva will be chair. And I should hand you over the gavel.
Okay.
All right.
I'll take it.
All right.
Thank you.
This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.